Yeah, so I'm Anne-Marie Tréguier. I'm a physical oceanographer at LOPS, and I work on modeling the ocean climate, so with the ocean component of the coupled climate models. And I have been an author for the IPCC reports that came out in this August. So that's the IPCC report of the Working Group 1. And so I don't know which way you would like to go about this this time we have together. I thought that perhaps we could start with your questions about, contributing to IPCC. How does this work? I suppose you have questions about that, so we could start about that. Then, if you have specific questions about the report, I have a number of slides, but maybe, again, it's better to start with your questions for you to ask whatever questions you have about this report, rather than me going through it. Not sure. But I would like to start perhaps with some questions about IPCC in general and IPCC authors.
Do you enjoy to do that, working with a lot of colleagues, and do you enjoy and how do you consider the importance of this work and report?
Well, I enjoyed it a lot. For me, this was new. I have colleagues, especially in Paris, in IPSL, who have contributed over the years to many cycles of the IPCC. IPCC works in cycles. So a cycle used to be like 5 years. Now it's more like 8 years, almost 10 years. And over the cycle, there is a new head of IPCC and new coordinating lead authors for each report, and also new authors. So for me, it was the first time, even though I'm not really young, but I was very happy to do it. And yes, I think what is really interesting is to work with scientists from different disciplines and from all over the world. Each author team is very diverse, and this was very interesting. I was very happy that we started in 2018. So the first meeting was in July, I think, 2018, and for our report, the one that came out in August, Working Group 1, we could have 3 meetings in person before COVID. So I think it was very good to know the people we are working with. I know that it's a matter of debate. How should IPCC go about the next reports? Should everything be done at a distance? I think probably they will end up doing something in between with less physical meetings, but still at least 1 or 2, because it makes it much more enjoyable to actually be able to know your colleagues. Regarding the importance of the reports, of course, I think it's important. And then the way they are taken up by the society at large and politics is something we don't have control on as scientists.
How do you feel when you are listening the COP and the meetings? Are you full of hope, or because you and your colleague are the base of this wonderful work? So how do you feel when you hear people talking about that, your work?
Well, I think I'm rather optimistic in nature, so I'm always full of hope. And perhaps, I don't know whether you are familiar with the different working groups of IPCC. Perhaps I could say that. So, the working group 1 is on the physical-chemical basis of climate change. So why is climate changing, and why do we know the role of man and the role of greenhouse gases in this warming and changing of the climate? So all the aspects of the physical and chemical change of the atmosphere, the ocean, everything, observations and simulations of possible futures. So that's working group 1. And then there is a second report, working group 2, dealing with impacts and also how can we adapt to climate change. So in terms of everything, the ecosystems, the agriculture, changing regarding human health, all these aspects are working group 2. And then there is a third one, working group 3, dealing with mitigation. How can we stop climate change? How can the societies reduce emissions? How can we get on the right path regarding, for example, the Paris Agreement? So the working group 3 report will come out in March, I think, working group 2 in February. And the colleagues working in these other working groups are much closer to the politics than I am. I mean, as a member of working group 1, you are more remote. You just say, well, this is what is happening. And then you talk about the possible futures based on scenarios that other people have given you, basically working group 3. And they create scenarios, and then you try and simulate what will happen based on the scenarios. But I think, for example, people like economists or sociologists and so on, working in working group 3 on mitigation, what is possible to do, how can the societies change to mitigate climate change. Those would be more closely linked with the COP, I think, rather than us. I mean, we just provide the basis, but then the way societies can adapt or mitigate is more the work of the 2 other working groups, and those are the reports that will come out in February and March. So you should be ready to jump on them and to read them and to, well, not reading the full report, of course, but I mean looking at the summaries and the slides and the graphs and so on. That's all.
How does the working process look like? As far as I know, IPCC just don't do their own research. They basically scan the literature. And I mean, your working group together, how does the working process look like that? In general, to put down the information into the report and in the end.
Alors, the way the reports are designed, first, there is a political decision from the United Nations, because IPCC is the body of the United Nations. So first, there is a decision of the member state to say, okay, we want a report, and they also vote on the outline. So when the authors, like myself, are selected, because we just volunteered and, out of some hundreds, we managed to be selected as part of an effort to create those diverse teams of authors from different countries and different backgrounds. When we are selected for a specific chapter, and we have already bullet points saying what we need to do in these chapters. And if we were to wander away from our chapter, then the governments can say, but this was not in the outline, you don't need to deal with that was not what we asked for. So we really are constrained by this outline. And so we start with those 5 or 6 bullet points and then try to think about what is really important. And because IPCC is on these cycles, our basis, of course, is a report that came out in 2013 and 14. And so, what is new? I mean, basically, we concentrated what is new since that time. And so we try to see what is literature, what has changed. Everybody brings knowledge to the table. And it's a very long process of writing and rewriting and revising. So the first version we wrote was I think, beginning of 2020. And then there was a cycle of revising, and then another version, and then again revising, and the final version. And so each time we have meetings, it's to discuss what should go in that section, who is going to write what, have you seen this latest paper, how to organize the coordination with the other chapters. We need to talk about that, but chapter 2 is also talking about that. I mean, you should meet together to be sure everything is consistent. It's so big, the number of pages, and the team of author is about 200 people. So for each chapter, it's about 12, 15. And so it's so big that we spend a lot of time just trying to see what the others do and trying to coordinate everything. Sometimes it can be frustrating.
And do some people disagree between users?
Yeah. There are some. So I must say that I was asked to contribute to chapter 1, which is the introduction. So that was not what I asked for when I was when I sent in my CV to be a candidate. I said I would like, of course, to contribute to the chapter 9, which is on the ocean and cryosphere. But there are already enough people, and so I worked on the introduction. So in some sense, this means that there were not a lot of heated debates, because like in chapter 9, you would have people debating on is the AMOC going to collapse or not, debating on what can we say about sea level, considering the instabilities of the Antarctic ice sheet, for example. So in each chapter there were debates like that, and for us, for the introduction, not really, I would say. So it was more about what kind of information is important and what is really new compared to what we already had in AR5, what is new regarding observations, why do you think it is important to talk about the way temperature data are collected and assembled, for example, what about the new satellites, have the model have changed or not, what has changed, all those things. So it was not heated debates, it was just selecting the relevant information for us. But in some chapters, yes, there was some debate.
Do you maybe know if the outcome of the COP26 could be included into the report of the report coming in February and March, or is it too short?
I don't know what you mean by included.
No, I mean if it will be discussed in the report of the chapter group 2 and 3, that they could say, okay, with COP26 there is these and these pledges that were made, so according to these pledges that could be, but maybe it's too short in a few months that to change the report.
Yeah, I mean, this is always a debate. As you said, we are not supposed to do new science. We rely on published scientific papers. So for each report there is a cut-off deadline. That is, if something has not been published in a scientific paper by this day, then it cannot be quoted. Now, we talk about the general frame, like in our introduction we talked about the COP and the Paris Agreement, but in very general terms. Regarding the report on mitigation, really I don't know, because they work exactly like we do, and of course they are of different disciplines. I mean, I'm a physical oceanographer myself, so I'm not very familiar with how economists, for example, work, or political science, or but I suppose they have the same constraints, that they have to rely on things that are published. So if, for example, somebody writes a rapid response paper on the new commitment that the countries make is going to do this and that, then perhaps they still have time to quote this paper. But yeah, I'm not sure. I think it's probably a bit late.
I see. How many people are there in the IPCC, and especially in your group?
So I think I had a slide for that. So that was just my working group 1. So 234 authors. And then there are those teams for each report. And there is also a kind of permanent body, which is the IPCC Council and a bureau with a head. And so there is a whole structure overseeing the works of the different working groups. And so this working group was led by Valérie Masson-Delmotte, who is a paleoceanographer and paleoclimatologist at LSE in Paris, and by a Chinese colleague. And I was talking about the review comments. Those are during those 2 processes of putting out the report and asking everybody who wants to review part of it. We collect review comments, and we have to answer to each of them. And there are review editors who read the review responses and tell us whether they are adequate, that we must not say, I don't like that comment, I'll skip it. It's not possible. You just have to answer. So that's a long process.
How all these authors are like permanent scientists, or do you work also with young scientists and postdoc or PhD students? And do you encourage young scientists to work in such a process, or is it much more for permanent?
I think that, during the process, I said there is a vote on the outline, but by that time the heads are already chosen. So Valérie Masson-Delmotte and her Chinese colleague, they're then at the chapters and the candidates, and they proposed composition of the writing group for the different chapters. And Valérie Masson-Delmotte had really the will to make the team younger. So it was fortunate that I was part of the team. But overall, there were quite a lot of, I would say, colleagues with like 10 years, 15 years of experience, but not a lifetime. And for a PhD student or a postdoc, I don't think it's really possible, because it's a long commitment, like 3-4 years, and it takes a lot of time. So you really need to have somebody who will sign up and say, okay, that person can spend that time and is supported. And that's why, in fact, you can be a candidate, but then the countries filter them, because the IPCC doesn't want to receive hundreds of candidates from France, for example. Probably there is not much filtering in developing countries because there are less candidates, but in the developed countries there is some pre-selection done. And then when your government transmits your name, this means that, okay, that person will be supported. And in developing countries, this also involves that the government, in one way or another, will pay for the meetings, for example, for that person to go to the meeting. Only authors from developing countries can ask help from IPCC for travel.
but how the IPCC is present at the COP26 and how is it involved in the process? Or?
Well, I mean, this is something I have not followed. I think it's been done mainly at the level of the Bureau. Valerie will be present and will, or has already presented the report, been asked to present the report. I know some colleagues have gone there, but I mean the COP, as you know very well, I mean there is this kind of public part and there is a negotiating table, and except from, you know, like a high-level talk from Valerie presenting the result of the report, the scientists are not in direct contact with I do not sit at the negotiating table. I mean, it's a different arena. Yeah?
Is IPCC present or represented at every COP? And how do you make sure that the reports, either the big ones or like the special reports in between, are read by the officials? If you can.
I mean, IPCC is present, that's sure. I mean, there's always some kind of introduction or whatever by the IPCC president, and I mean, IPCC is present, of course. How to make sure that the reports are read? I mean, that's really a big question. I would say, from an author point of view, I mean, this is really why we have this summary for policymakers. The structure of the report is that there are chapters, and then there is a technical summary and a summary for policymakers. So the authors for the summary for policymaker are chosen amongst the authors. So I didn't volunteer for that because I didn't think I had really the competence or the experience to write for politicians and to be synthetic enough and to have a kind of general overview. But I think there were about 40 lead authors for the summary for policymaker, and this summary is really must be written in ways that can be understood by the governments, and hopefully in every government that participates in IPCC, so almost all the governments basically on the planet, they have in a department or a ministry or whatever, there are people who have actually read this summary for policymaker. But the head of states actually making the decisions, I'm not sure they have time to read even this 30-page long summary. Probably they rely on their advisors to read it. Yeah, so...
But actually, most of people saying they read the IPCC report, in fact, they read the summary for policymakers. Most of them.
Yeah. I mean, this may sometimes make you wonder what the use is to write such a long report. And we were asked to try to keep within a certain number of pages, but the science on climate is so growing so much and going so fast that from one report to the next, I guess that the heads say, oh, okay, I mean, we did those 900 pages. What's the point? I mean, next report will be 200 pages. But then there's been so much new science coming that really you have somehow to write it down so that at least a team of authors, say 12, 15 people, really agree that this is new science, that is solid, that is, in order to have the basis to draw your 40 pages of summary for policymakers. So it's a very time-consuming process. And I don't know whether they will find other ways to do that in the future.
But as as a scientist, why did you decide to be part of the IPCC? Is that like a personal feeling that you need to participate to, that it is your role to bring the science to the policymaker, or?
I mean, I think it's part of the work of a researcher to try to help make the science better understood and help make it so that the science can be the basis of sound decision making. And I was, I think, attracted just by meeting others. And I have met some in the US or in Europe over the year, or colleagues at LCE, and when they were talking about their experience, I mean, it looked really interesting. Yeah, I mean, I thought that was something I wanted to do before I retired, basically, right? Because I had not done it before. Sometimes I had seen, I could do that, and said, but I have too many things to do. I cannot do that. I won't be able to contribute efficiently. And I think nobody should say that. If you are interested and you are in a position to do so, I mean, just volunteer. I mean, you may not be selected anyway, so just volunteer and then see what happens if you are interested.
What are the criteria of selection?
Well, I mean, Valerie explained first, when you contribute, when you are a candidate, you must say why you think you are relevant and why you want to do it. So why you say you are relevant, you must like 5 of your... You have published things that are relevant in the context of the working group you want to contribute to. Like if I wanted to contribute to working group 3, I think I wouldn't be found very relevant for mitigation issues. So there is that. And then after that, what Valerie explained to us is that she really had this will to make the group more diverse. She tried to find as many women as she could. She tried to strongly support participants from developing countries. And she also wanted the group to be younger. And but I think that in that way, I mean, I could not have been selected, but that was my first time in IPCC, so that was also one of her criteria. So, I mean, and then there is also the discipline, of course. Like if you have a chapter on ocean and cryosphere, you won't put only oceanographers in it. You also need sea ice and land ice and people with expertise for the Arctic and for Antarctica and so on. So it's a very complicated equation. I mean, I think I never ask her how long it took her and how many people were around the table when they did that work.
How do you interact with the other authors from the team? I mean, is there a Zoom chat every week? Or
yeah, so that's a good question. People used to do that in a kind of ad hoc way, so we were expecting, the pattern before COVID was that every working group was meeting, there were 4 meetings for each working group, 6 months apart, more or less. And then between those meetings we could work as we wanted, so using whatever means of work we wanted to do, and we organized the meetings monthly, or then when there was a rush towards the deadline, every week or so, things like that. We were told, for example, that we shouldn't use Google Docs, because that was not supposed to be very secure, but we ended up using Google Docs, but some other chapters said, oh no, we have been told not to use Google Docs, so we don't do it. So we were working together on shared documents, and for the meeting, in my chapter we use Zoom all the time, almost. At some point, what was happening? Well, I mean, you have to do a few things. Yeah, that was the problem for the Google Docs. At some point, or was it Slack? I don't know. We also had a Slack thing. But we had in our team somebody from Sudan, and there were things she just couldn't use. She, at some point, I mean, she couldn't, I don't remember whether it was Slack or whether it was Zoom at the beginning. She couldn't use Zoom, I think, or something. So we really had to try and adapt to the different, the possibilities in the different countries of the team, so that everybody could be there. But of course, I mean, because of the time zones, sometimes the meetings ended up to be at 10 p.m. or something like that.
You said that you are optimistic about the situation, and can you explain how can you be optimistic after writing this?
Well, I mean, this is not something I can say as a scientist, right? I mean, I'm not working on mitigation, I'm not in political science, I'm not an economist, so it's just the fact that, I mean, I think I remember somebody from IPCC, I don't remember who it was, telling me like 10, 15 years ago when the other report came out, that, well, anyway, I mean, the governments couldn't really start to move until the change in temperature and in climate was evident enough that you wouldn't have persuaded anybody before you could actually see the change before your eyes. And now we are there, so I think that the incentive to change is there. And it really depends what you mean by optimistic. I mean, the temperature is already higher by 1.1 degree relative to pre-industrial. We know that we are going to reach 1.5. So we know that there are some things that are done already, and we cannot go back. But the issue is really to stabilize the climate rather than continuing, for example, to use all the coal resource in the ground. And it seems to me that, I mean, those are the kinds of decisions that humanity can do, but maybe just my optimistic nature.
Have you read the whole report?
No, I haven't. No, of course I have read the chapter I contributed to many times. I have read almost everything in the chapter 9, the cryosphere. I have read also the chapter on future climate, future scenarios. We are asked at each step to read other chapters as reviewers ourselves. So I read twice, I think, chapter 4 for that. I still have to read the chapters on regional climate and climate extremes. I mean, this is a subject I find very interesting, and I haven't read that. I have read parts of the carbon cycle chapter, the one on energy, chapter 7. There are a lot of interesting things in that report, but no, I haven't read everything yet. Change the background. Yeah.
On the regional climate chapter, is there any communication with other regional initiatives? I'm thinking about the MEDIC report, which is about the Mediterranean.
It's about what?
The MEDIC report, which is the Mediterranean report for climate change in that region. Is there any communication between IPCC and these kind of initiatives? Probably there's another one.
I mean, I think so, because basically the authors must be aware of all the relevant publications, and when there are publications that already are a synthesis of existing literature, I mean, they are taken in as important, useful contributions. So I would say yes, probably the team of authors are varied enough to take that into account. And then I would suspect, for example, that if you have a group that works on climate change in the Mediterranean, some of them, if they are not authors of the report, will act as reviewers. They will be on the look and see, oh, there is this new IPCC report, the first of the draft or the second of the draft is out, and they come in as reviewers to point out where there may be deficiencies on their subject of interest. The review process is for that reason, to be sure that we don't miss important things.
About the graphs that there is in the reports, the graphs.
The graphs, yeah.
How, I'm sure that the graphs must be from publications that you have assessed, but how do you decide this graph or this graph is better than this one, or visually speaking, or?
Yeah, I mean, that was something new for me, and before I came, I mean, I had no idea how important were the graphs. And I don't know whether that was something that Valérie Masson-Delmotte knew when she named the author, so who was good at graphs. In our group, we had colleagues from the UK. What's his first name? Ed Hawkins, yeah. And I mean, he is renowned as a graph guy. And so he was very helpful, and I was surprised to see that everybody was basically making the graphs themselves. Even somebody like Malte Meinhausen, who was also in my chapter, who is the one leading the magic model, doing idealized models of response of scenarios, in fact, and response to emissions. So he's more like, I would say, almost a working three group guy, somebody working on mitigation, but he was part of our chapter team, and he was just doing graphs himself. So most of the graphs are done anew by the authors of each chapter. And then when it comes to the summary for policymaker, there is a different procedure that really there is a joint team between the technical support unit and the authors to decide how many graphs there can be. They first decide what the message is, what is the message of this figure, and then after that there is a drafting process, and most of the figures in the summary for policymakers are done by professional graphists. But that's only at this level. In the chapters, I mean, we could ask support from the technical unit for some graphs, but they didn't have the resources, I mean, mainly. So it was mainly the frequently asked questions that they were doing and the summary for policymaker. Otherwise, you could have some advice, and there are some conventions like through the report temperature must be. I mean, there are some color scales that you are supposed to use. I don't know whether, yeah, those graphs, for example, were done by Ed Hawkins, and so there are some color bars that you are supposed to use and things like that. Yeah, so this is an example of illustration of the concept of emergence of climate change. And when you look at those maps, you always see the polar amplification of the